Hello again, and welcome back to Marketing with Purpose. My name is Monica Pitts, and this is episode 2. No, not episode 2 of our podcast. That was like back in 2019. It's episode 2 of our Podcasting 101 series. And in this episode, I'm going to talk tech, and you know that is one of my favorite things to talk about is tech. So in this episode, we're going to dig into things like what type of microphone are you needing to use? What type of software do you need to edit? Where are you going to host your podcast? How are you going to get a podcast website? And how are you going to make sure that you get your podcast published regularly? Like, what does that system look like? How do you set it up to make sure that you never miss a beat? Yeah, that's this episode. Waha! And I gave you a big picture overview of some of this tech stuff back in episode 1. Now, if what you need information on are things like how often you're going to publish, how long your episode should be, what types of decisions do you need to make before you ever even record your first episode, like your show details, what to title it, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's back in episode 1 of this Podcast 101 series. So you can pop back over there and listen to that at your leisure. Now, I know tech can be tricky for a lot of people, and sometimes these words are really weird. Like you hear them and you have no idea what that word just was. Okay, so for you, my friends, we also have a downloadable PDF guide that you can, that has all the things that we're going to talk about in it today. Imagine that. Like literally, I am using it to guide me through this conversation with you today. So you can get a link to that guide in the show notes, and you can also get it over at mayecreate.com. That's MAYECREATE.com with this episode and the previous one. Now, all of these practical tech tips and all of the actionable advice that I'm going to give you today are things that I have learned the hard way, my friends. Absolutely. We've published over 200 episodes of Marketing with Purpose, and we have tens of thousands of downloads under our belt, but we started in the exact same place that you are today, with no clue what we were doing, but with a story to tell and so much advice to share. And so as we tackle all these challenges as a business, we like to share what we figure out with you so that way, you don't have to learn it the hard way. So get that PDF guide with all the details and let's get techie. Friends, let's get to business. You're on a mission and you just need more people to know about it. And whether you're brand new to marketing or a seasoned pro, we are all looking for answers to make marketing decisions with purpose. I'm Monica Pitts, a techie, crafty business owner, mom, and aerial dancer who solves communication challenges through technology. This podcast is all about digging in and going digital. I'll share my marketing know-how and business experience from almost 20 years of misadventures. I'll be your backup dancer so you can stop doubting and get moving towards marketing with purpose. Okay, so let's talk tech. We're going to start at the top with microphone, then we'll move into audio software, podcast hosting, then how to get your website out there, and last but not least, the production process. So starting at the top with microphone, friends, I like to think of microphones in 2 groups. There are microphones that need a mixer and microphones that do not need a mixer. So the microphone that I have that doesn't need a mixer, it plugs in with a USB. So if you don't want to have a mixer and you only have one person recording, then a USB mic is absolutely fine and it works great. I think it sounds wonderful. I use a Rode Podcaster and it works really easily. Now, for my microphone that I plug into a mixer, like if I have a guest on my podcast and we're doing it in the same room, I have a Rode NT1. And for my mixer, I use Scarlett 212. And to be fair, it actually took hiring a radio guy onto my staff to understand that I even needed a mixer. I can't tell you how much time I spent trying to figure out how to get 2 USB mics to work on my computer. It was not easy. It never worked. Never. I just needed this mixer. And so we use Scarlett 212, and it allows us to record with 2 separate audio tracks for 2 people in the same room using Adobe Audition. I am not a microphone snob. I'm really not. For my guests, I really don't care what kind of microphone that they use, to be honest. A lot of them just use AirPods and it sounds fine. Some of them just use their webcam mic, and that's great too. I do feel like if you're going to be hosting your own podcast, then it would make sense to invest in a good microphone so that way you sound good. Now, at the very beginning, obviously, you can just use what you have, right? You totally can. I've nothing against that. But once you've been publishing for a while, you're probably going to want to invest in some good equipment, like a good microphone, because after you've been doing it, people want it to be good. As podcasts become more mainstream, people's expectation of podcasts are going to rise, right? It used to be that you could just have the crappiest website on earth and nobody cared. But now people are used to looking at websites. They have an expectation that your website doesn't suck, right? And it's going to be the same way with podcasts. So since you're probably thinking about starting one now, it means you're not really an early adopter. You're somebody who's coming onto the scene a little bit later. So I do feel like while maybe to get started, you could use your mic from your webcam, I would probably suggest getting a decent microphone, even if it's one of the less expensive ones. So that way you can have better quality audio to start, because people kind of expect that you don't have crappy audio at this point. Now, you'll need to have a great setup for your microphone. Most people like to use an adjustable boom arm. This is like that black crane-looking thing that they screw onto the side of their desk, and it holds the microphone so that way it can be really close to your face and you can talk and pick up your voice really clearly without having as much echo. You also want a shock mount so that way you have like less weird noises coming through on your mic. Anytime that you touch your microphone, it makes weird sounds. It records everything, right? And so it needs to be able to move a little bit in case something bumps your desk and not make weird sounds. And that's what the shock mount is for. Also, you have to have you don't have to have, but it's good to have a mic windscreen. Some people call this a spit guard. It's like a round thing that hangs out in front of your microphone. You know, you see musicians with them in front of the microphone all the time. It limits that weird mouth sound. That thing, it limits that. Yeah, because it's gross sounding, isn't it? And sometimes I use that, but then I also have like this foam thing that I can put over the top of my microphone that does a lot of the same limiting of those sounds. And while this next tip isn't necessarily exactly tied to your microphone, you need a quiet place to record that isn't super echoey. So a lot of people have to do a bit of echo reduction research. For example, in my last office, I had a lot of noise from the staff out in the main room. And so we had to get noise canceling curtains and hang them all around my office to make it quiet in the office. Otherwise, you would hear the staff conversations in the background as I was recording my podcasts. In my current office, it has really high ceilings. And so I have echo reducing panels that I put around me as I am podcasting. And even then, you can probably hear it just a little bit right now. To be fair, like some of the echo reduction can be adjusted after you have recorded your audio, but it's better to get the best quality audio to begin with because it's not like a layered file, it's one audio track, and sometimes you can adjust it and sometimes you can't. So just make sure that you're in a quiet room, try to reduce your echo as much as possible, and then you'll have a great playback for your guests. Okay, so we've talked a lot about microphones. Let's talk a little bit about your audio software. You're going to need to have a recording and editing software. There are lots of different online options for you to use. You could use a service like Riverside.fm or Squadcast. I've been a guest on both of those systems and they work really, really well. Some people use Zoom or they use Skype and those work well too. I use Ring Central, but to be honest, I'm really considering not using it anymore because I find that when you use Zoom, Skype, or Ring Central, one of those type of online meeting softwares, it really depreciates the quality of your guest audio. Whenever I use Zoom, Ring Central, or Skype, I always actually record a second audio file of my own audio. So that way I have a nice clean version of my host audio, but then my guests seem kind of far away and a little scratchy, right? And it happens. It really does happen, and it's because those services are meant to consolidate the audio and just make it a usable file. They're not meant to make podcasts, right? So those are good. They're a great starter, but if you want to have a really high quality audio track, you can allow your guest to record themselves on their computer locally. I've looked into using StreamYard to do just that, but also Riverside.fm and Squadcast, which are like all-in-one solutions, do a pretty good job. And like I said, you can always record a backup audio of yourself in your editing software, so you have a good quality audio copy of yourself at least, because the internet can do some really weird things. Now, for editing software, I use Adobe Audition, but I totally started with Audacity. And Audacity is free. It's really simple. And it was a good software for me to start with and start working with audio files. I don't traditionally love files that go on forever, like audio and video. Working on a timeline was really weird for my brain to wrap around at first because I build websites and they're like layered digital things, right? So it was tricky, but then once I got the hang of it, it came together pretty good. And once I used Audacity for a while with that simple user interface, I moved into Adobe Audition with no problem. And I liked it a lot better because it is more robust and it allows me to mix down my tracks easily and keep them in the mix down files where I can like swap stuff out and easily edit. So those would be the editing softwares that I would suggest. I know that some people also use GarageBand, and it works really well for them. So you're just going to use the recording and editing software of your choice, and you'll probably also have to have an interview recording software if you're not just recording episodes by yourself. If you're just recording episodes by yourself, you could do them in Audition or Audacity or GarageBand, whatever editing software you want. But if you're going to do them with guests, you're going to need another way to get those guests into the software. If they were going to be face-to-face with you, you could have your mixer and you could still just use your recording and editing software. But if they're going to be a virtual guest, then you're going to need some other system that will allow you to record all that audio. Okay, so is this techie enough for you yet? This is so much fun, isn't it? Oh, I'm having a good time. I hope you are too. Okay, so let's transition into talking about podcast hosting. So you're going to record your podcast and then you have to upload your episode file and all the information about your episode up into a hosting platform. And that hosting platform is meant to distribute your podcast episodes out to different networks for you. So that way people can listen wherever they like to listen to their podcast. So podcast hosting networks are things like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Pandora, YouTube podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pocket Casts. So those are all different examples of networks, okay? Now, there are plugins that allow you to host your own podcast on your website. You can do that. And they say that some of them actually do integrate out with other networks. That's an option. Here's the deal, though. I'm kind of not a huge fan of that. Let me explain why as your website geeky friend. Your website host is meant to host your website, which means that that server has been optimized to host websites. It was not necessarily optimized to host audio files or video files. If you've noticed, like when you go out to YouTube, that sucker just loads up and plays, right? That's because that server is meant to host video and play it all day long, all night long. That's what it's there for, right? So it's the same thing with the audio. The audio hosts are made to play audio. That's what they're used for, day in and day out. So I am a big fan of using video networks to host video and audio networks to host audio, and then putting it on my website for people to get to on that other host, right? I know that sounds a little backwards, but you're going to put it over there and then you're going to link to it on your website, basically. So that's my theory. You can put it on your website if you want to, but I feel like you should probably pay for a podcast host because it's going to stream better for your listeners, and that's what you want. You don't want people waiting and buffering forever. You want it to play quick, just like YouTube. Okay? All right. So enough with that. Now let's talk about different podcast hosts. Now, I use Castos. That's my host. It is actually really good if you have a WordPress site and you want the podcast to integrate with your site and you want to manage it through your website. Now, that's pretty cool because it means you only have to enter stuff in one place and then it's everywhere. I'm talking more about websites in a minute, so I'm going to leave that at that. The other thing I really like about Castos is I can have unlimited podcasts within my one hosting plan. I can have unlimited time, like unlimited minutes uploaded per month. So it gave me a lot of flexibility and I like that about it. Now it does have some drawbacks. And so we've worked with Buzzsprout as well. And the thing I really like about Buzzsprout, I think the thing that sets it apart from other hosting companies is its ability to inject audio clips dynamically into your podcasts. So if you promote events or specials on your podcasts and you don't want to bake them in, and by baking them in, I mean let them permanently live inside of your audio file, like they're never going to leave, they're there forever, then this capability is pretty freaking sweet. I've actually thought about switching to Buzzsprout because of this very thing, because sometimes it's a different season of the year and I know people are thinking about marketing more than they're thinking about websites, or they're thinking about year-end giving for my nonprofits more than they're thinking about websites. And so I want to talk to them about what they're thinking about, and I want them to go find the resources that they want, or maybe I'm having a workshop and I want to promote it. Yeah. I can't do that with my current hosting platform, but you can with Buzzsprout. Castos says they're working on it, but I haven't seen it come out yet. Okay, so there we are with that. Now, when you are thinking about choosing a host, definitely look at the number of episode limits and time limits before buying, because they all control those costs in different ways. So if you are going to publish 4 episodes a month and they're going to be an hour each, then you cannot subscribe to a podcast host that only lets you upload 2 hours worth of content a month. Yeah. Wouldn't work, would it? Or if you're going to want your episodes to live on forever and be an evergreen marketing material for you, then you can't use a podcast host that only allows you to have episodes up for 2 months. Yeah, that doesn't work either, does it? Yeah, okay. So I also want you to look and see how it integrates with your website, because you do want to put it on your website. I'll talk about that in just 1 second. And then make sure that your podcast will be distributed to the networks that your audience is on. So once again, those networks, if you push it up to Apple, then Castos actually pushes Apple Podcasts out to Overcast, Downcast, Podcast Index, and Listen Notes. Other places that I really feel like you should probably have your podcast on are Amazon, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and Pocket Casts, because those are the more popular networks. Now, Google Podcasts is going away. Like, it's not going to be around for much longer. So instead, you want to put your podcast up with YouTube Podcasts. And if you already have a YouTube channel for your video, then you would just put it in the exact same channel as your video underneath podcasts. It's super stinking easy. And it will automatically publish every single time that you add it to your podcast host once it's set up. So once it's set up, it automatically publishes out there. Now, it's a little tricky because if you don't have the same audience for your YouTube channel as you would for your podcast, then you would probably want to set up a new YouTube channel to put your podcasts on. But if your podcast and your channel share the same audience, keep them in the same channel. Easy peasy. And once you set it up, it'll automatically update. And it's pretty rad. Last but not least, before you choose a host, I would look at its tracking capabilities. They all come with different tracking. Now, I haven't found one that's incredibly robust yet. There is another software that you can subscribe to that has more tracking in it for your podcast. I find most podcast hosting companies are going to give you the basics, like how many episodes do you have? How many downloads were there on those episodes? Where are your listeners physically located? What networks are they listening on? Now, if you really are a data person, you're going to want to know things like how long are people listening to each episode, right? That would be great to know. Different things like that. So really think about what you want out of the tracking capabilities, and then make sure that whatever hosting company you pair with gives you that, because they don't all do that. A lot of them, it's pretty rudimentary. All right. So That's what I have to tell you about hosting. Now, one thing that you're going to take into consideration with that hosting thought is how you want to put your podcast online, not just in the podcast networks, right? Because we already talked about how your hosting will do that for you. Now we need to talk about online, like the website for your podcast. And I believe that every single podcast needs a website. Yeah. Okay. And it's not just because I'm a web developer. There is actually a reason for that. If your reason for podcasting is to get more business, then you want to drive people back to your marketing home, which is your website, and encourage them to learn more about your business. And the easiest way to do that is to put your podcast on your website. Now, if what you really want to do is drive more and more traffic to your website and rank for more and more terms out on Google and boost your SEO through producing a podcast so that you can get more potential buyers onto your website, yes? Okay. Well, the only way you can do that is if your episodes are put in as a post or a page on your website, or if you upload them physically as videos on YouTube. So what do I mean by that? I mean that when you go out to Google and you search for a topic that you might cover on your podcast, if it's just published out on, say, the hosting provider's website that they provide for you, it's not going to show up in Google search results. I've yet to have anything show up in Google search results for a podcast that is on just the podcast hosting provided website. Okay. They just don't show up. Also, if they're just out on the network and you're not using the website feature at all, they don't show up either. So just because they're out on iTunes, they're not going to show up in Google search results. They just don't. But the pages of your website or the posts on your website, they will show up in Google search results. So you're going to have to go through that extra step and make sure that on your website, you have a page or a post for every single episode that you want to rank for in Google when people search for it. Yes. Okay. So the other thing that Google does display in their search results are videos. Now, I just told you that if you want to have your podcast up in YouTube, you can put it up as a podcast on your channel. That's cool. It's really cool because YouTube will make a video for you dynamically for every single episode and put it up as a podcast episode. Podcast, not video. If you want it to show up in Google search results, it has to be a video on YouTube, not a podcast in YouTube. That's as of this moment, as of March 2024. That could change in the future because Google is Google, right? But as of right now, those podcasts do not show up in search results in Google. They may show up in search results on YouTube, but they won't in Google. So if what you're trying to do is get more people to your website or have more people find you on Google, then you're going to need to put it on your website. Yes? Or you need to put it up as a video, not using the RSS feed, not as a podcast out on YouTube. Oh, okay. I know. Well, okay. Hopefully I differentiated that well and you get it. So back to the top, you make a new page or a post for each podcast episode on your website. Consider making a blog post to accompany each episode because that is going to optimize well in the search engine. To make sure that they're going to show up in search, you need to take one more step and do keyword research for your episode titles and then optimize those blog posts or the episode summaries with those keywords that you know people are using to search for that you have answers for in your podcast. Okay? This is a great way to drive traffic back to your website. Absolutely great, right? But you got to have your podcast in your proper website, and it has to have a page or a post for each episode. Okay, so here's a few different ways that you can add that podcast to your website. One is Castos offers that WordPress plugin, and the plugin allows you to manage your podcast publication on your website. So you don't have to log into Castos to do it. It's all on your WordPress site. Now that sounds really cool, but there are a few drawbacks. I think the biggest drawback is that the main podcast display, like the main page where your podcast will be listed, where all the episodes will be listed, it isn't super sexy. It's really not. But we have actually customized quite a few of these to look pretty decent. Yeah. So I'm not saying you're going to get like the height of customization out of this plugin, but you can do a lot with it if you've got a web developer who can work with you. Now, the individual episode page formatting does allow some customization for the display of the player. There's like a few display options that you can change, like the color and that kind of thing. But you do have complete control over how your blog post or show notes look, because that's up to you. You're putting it into a post on your WordPress site. And so the way that it looks is honestly completely up to you. Don't go too crazy though, because you want to have some level of consistency between the different episodes on your site. So that way people who usually come to your website, your regular visitors, aren't like, where's the player this time? Why do I have to always hunt for it? Yeah, you don't want that. So you can also just add them in a blog as a blog post, your individual episodes. There are other WordPress plugins that will allow you to connect, and you could use a custom post type if you were using a WordPress site. I know, look how techie I'm getting for you here, but follow along with me here, okay? So there's a lot of WordPress plugins that will allow you to connect your podcast feed to your site, but they don't let you manage your podcast through your site like the one with Castos does. Most of them don't create a page or a post for you when an episode is published. They're kind of like a liaison between your host and your website. So they allow you to get to the information out on your host without actually having to log into your host and copy it from over there. So what you would need is to either create a custom post type if you already have a blog and you want to house this separately on your WordPress site, or you can just use your main blog page on whatever type of website that you have. If you have a blog, then you could just create a post for each episode of your podcast while also posting that information for each episode out on your podcast host. So you're going to put it out on the podcast host, and then you're going to go back to the website. And if there is a way to connect the two together, then you would use that connector to make it so that way your podcast is playable from your website. If you don't have a connector, like, all is not lost. Every host I've looked at has a way to embed a player for each episode for your podcast on a page or on a post in your site. It's not even hard. You just copy it and you paste it in. Sometimes it's code. Sometimes you can just paste it in normally. And that will put the player on your site. You might not be able to customize it a lot, but it's really, really easy. And it's just like copy paste, right? So it's not a big deal. And if you are listening to this and you're like, yeah, but I've tried that and it's not working, Monica, insert it as code, okay? Put a block that's just code on your site and then paste it into the code block, and then it should work. Oh man, I know, mega tech. Okay, so now if that sounds terrible, if all of the things that I just talked about sounds terrible, but you still want to make sure that people can get to your podcast from your website, then you could do a simple iframe embed. So every host I've looked at has a way to embed your podcast on your site. Full disclaimer, this does not allow your episodes to show up in search results. It does not, but it will allow you to promote your podcast on your website without having to enter the information twice. So you would just add the episode file and details to the podcast host, and then it's displayed in the iframe on your site. So you would just have a page on your site that's called podcast. You would put the iframe on there, and then it has a player up at the top with your most recent episode on it. And then it has a way for people to click on other older episodes right down below. And if you click on an older episode, it pops up in the player up top and they can play it that way. So that's pretty rad. And it's really simple. But once again, if your goal is to get more traffic to your website and build that search engine optimization and get more good out of it, you're going to have to make a post for every single episode on your website. Yeah. Okay. I beat that one to death. Let's move on. Last but not least, let's talk about your production process. Now, some of you guys might not need this because you're pros and you have a way to manage all your marketing and recurring marketing tasks, and you know exactly how you're going to fit this in. All right. Now, others of you might not do recurring marketing tasks on the regular. And so this sounds like a management nightmare, because how are you ever going to get it done and get it done in a timely manner? Okay. Well, I've got a couple tricks for you. The first one is batch. So regardless of how you release your episodes, regardless if you do once a week or once a month, you would record them in batches because it will save a ton of setup time and it makes the process far more efficient. It also ensures a really consistent release schedule. You're not in the hamster wheel of constantly creating. You record them, you transcribe them, you make the show notes, you title them really good, you do your keyword research, you put it all out where it's supposed to go, and you do it all well ahead of the time that it's supposed to happen when your brain's like in that mode. You schedule them to publish and boom, batch. Because it's like when you're in talking mode, you're not in planning mode or researching mode, right? It's just, they're not the same. So schedule all those interviews for 1 or 2 days, knock them out, and then go to the next step, okay? Now, the next thing is you're going to need to have a way to track it. A lot of people use different marketing like softwares and systems to track all their marketing. I started by trying to manage all of our podcasting efforts through our project management system, and it was pretty much terrible. And it's because our project management system is really geared towards the types of projects that we do, which are websites. So it starts and it finishes, right? And then we have little updates that our clients might ask for along the way, but it's not a continual stream of information. And everything is documented in a very specific way. So as we try to adjust using that project management system to manage our podcasting, it was not working. There was way too many pieces of information that had to be shared all the time with everyone that they needed access to get the job done correctly to promote our podcast. So we actually moved it into a dashboarding program. And then we took it out of that and we decided to put it in a Google Sheet. And the Google Sheet lived for a while. We used that for like well over a year. And it worked well because we could share it between our team members and it allowed us space to put all the different pieces of information that we needed. And then we found Airtable. Airtable, my friends, is magical. I like using Airtable to manage this type of information because I have a spot for each piece of information, but I can also look at it in different views. In a nutshell, Airtable is a database building software that you don't have to know how to code to build your database in. And as a web developer, you can imagine this was like right up my alley. So what I found is that I personally like to see things on a calendar sometimes because it really helps me understand what's going on instead of just seeing it in a list. So in Google Sheets, that wasn't really possible unless I connected it with Google Calendar, and then that was just not working. So because I have way too many things out in Google Calendar. So instead in Airtable, they offer this thing called views. So you can sort the information in your database in different ways in each view. So we have a view that displays in a calendar, and I can see all of the episodes that are upcoming in a calendar. We also have a view that sorts by status because we have different members of our team that are responsible for different parts of the production process. So Mickey's view sorts by her statuses and Caitlin's view sorts by her statuses. And you can see how using that type of system makes it just so much more flexible. But whether you use a Google Sheet or a more extensive tool like Airtable, your chosen system has to organize all the pieces of information that you need for each podcast episode. So you're going to need columns for things like title, publish date, your guest information, a description of your podcast, your keywords, a link to your episode. We have a column where we put all of the social media graphics in there, social media text, promotion dates for when it's going to go out on social, for when it's going to go out on email. And we use all of this to really just keep it all together. And then you can sort it, filter it, and even automate it to do things. So ours, for example, sends a notification email to all of our guests on the day that the episode publishes with a link to their promotion graphic and a description of the podcast and a link out to the networks and our social networks. And that all is generated through Airtable and it automates itself. It's pretty cool. And the same thing with all the social media promotion on it. We just check a box and it adds it all to our social media scheduler. And that's a type of like power that you can harness in Airtable. But once again, you can keep it simple and you can put it in a spreadsheet. Just really think through all the different pieces of information that you're going to need to put into your podcast host, onto your website, and everywhere else to be able to promote the episode. make a column for each one, and voila, you have a system that can keep you organized. Okay, so as much as I am really enjoying geeking out with you right now, I feel like you're probably entering into information overload. Am I right? Yeah, because we just talked about a lot of things. Remember that all of this stuff is available in a PDF that you can download. Yes, PDF you can download. You can get it, and there's a link to it. It's in the show notes. Go get that PDF, right? We talked about what types of microphones, recording software, host for your podcast, putting it on your website. We got production tips. That's a lot of stuff. And if you haven't listened to it already, remember that we have episode 1 available for you for this podcast 101 series, where we talked about all those big picture decisions that you need to make before you even record a single episode of your podcast. Things like your show details, how often to publish, suggested lengths for episodes, and what types of human resources you need to consider to make sure that you can get every single thing done to promote and publish your podcast. Okay, so now you have all this knowledge. You are ready to go. Don't let all the options stop you. Okay, don't let them stop you from moving forward. Even if you're just going to use your webcam to record your first episode, do it. Do it, try it, get it figured out, use the free software. You've got this. Now your next step is just to take that next step. You're way ahead of where I was when I started mine. I didn't know any of this stuff, right? I had to figure it all out on my own. And now you have it, and it's all in a PDF, and it's ready for you to use. You have a story, and someone needs to hear it. You have advice, and someone needs it. What you have to say is valuable. Do not let the tech stop you from sharing your message, because people need you. They need you, okay? So when you get that first episode up there, I want you to email me. I want you to tell me about it. I want to go listen to it, okay? I want to be your first review. That's what I want to do for you. So send me an email when you get it up. Send me an email with a question if you have one, all right? Monica@mayecreate.com. monica@mayecreate.com. I want to know. I want to know, okay? So make sure you tell me. And until next time, go forth and market with purpose.